The Battle of Saint-Eloi will occur between March and April of 1916. Now, this is actually not an incredibly important battle in terms of the outcome of the war, but it is important to highlight two significant things. The first one I'll tell you right at the beginning, the last one I'll tell you at the end. The first reason that I want you to understand this one is because I want you to understand that the Canadians were not ultimately in charge of our own troops. We were under the command of a British general. The British High Command did not feel that Canada had any sufficiently experienced generals that they could be in command of an entire army. And so instead, they tended to put their own people in place. So there was a British general who was in charge of the Canadian Expeditionary Force. The problem with that was that the generals who were assigned this task tended to not be terribly appreciative of the quote-unquote honor. Remember, they still thought of us as a colony, not as an independent country, and therefore it would have been considered a little bit insulting to have been put in command of a colonial force as opposed to a quote-unquote British or proper force. So that's the first thing that you need going into Saint-Eloi. So let's have a look at what happened in the battle. All right, so first thing I want you to do is to take a look at where Saint-Eloi is. So here's Ypres, and we've encountered Ypres before. So Saint-Eloi is literally walking distance from it. So on March 27th, now this is before the Canadians get involved. So I'm just setting the scene right now. So March 27th, 1916, the British forces explode 6 enormous mines at the base of the ridge at Saint-Eloi. Saint-Eloi has been held by the Germans. So what they did is they dug a tunnel underneath, so it got all the way under the German trench line. They filled that end of it up with explosives, and then they blew it up. And what that was supposed to do is to provide, number one, it would shake up the German trench line and hopefully collapse some of it, but it would also make these huge holes that they could then use as cover when they tried to go across no man's land and then up that hill. So the explosions buried a lot of the German defenders, but not enough. So they quickly remanned their machine guns, and the poor British soldiers who were given the job of running at this trench line were just showered with machine gun fire. So they use the craters as cover, so they attempt to retake the ridge. So here's the ridge. Okay, so the ridge is along in here. And here are where the craters are. Now, at this point, the Canadians, we now have 2 divisions. Remember, before we only had a single division. We now have 2 whole divisions. So our 2nd division relieved the British forces on April 3rd. So the British forces came out. There were very few of them left. They were bedraggled. They were beat up. You can imagine how disheartening it was for the Canadians walking into that area to see the state of the men who were coming out. There were very few left alive. Just as a little side note, the Canadians were wearing the newly introduced steel helmet. And if we were in our classroom right now, I actually have one of these helmets, and you would have been allowed to try one on. So now the craters fill up with water, and the Canadians have to fight off attack after attack after attack. There is a particularly vicious series of attacks and counterattacks over the next 13 days. And the result of that is that the Germans take 4 of the 6 craters. So now there's only 2 in Canadian hands. This is kind of what it looked like. Now, these are not those craters that I was telling you about, the ones that they exploded. These are just what is the result of the mining, the shelling that happened. On April 19th, the Germans fired an absolutely crushing volley of mortars at the Canadian position, buried the defenders of one of the 2 remaining craters that we had in our hands. So now they have captured 4, destroyed 1, and only 1 is still in Canadian hands. So we surrendered. And that's the other reason I wanted you to know about this particular battle, is because I wanted you to understand that, you know, as heroic as I think that our guys were, I don't want you to think that we won everything. That, you know, if the Canadians walked in, we won the battle. We won a lot of them. We did a lot of good stuff, but I want you to understand that we could also lose. This particular loss cost us 1,373 Canadian casualties. At the beginning, I talked about how a British general was in charge. Well, his name was General Alderson, and he had made such poor decisions that even Sir Douglas Haig, who was the British Supreme Commander, he considered him to be unworthy, which was odd because they had been schoolmates. And so he fired him, and he replaced him with General Julian Byng. Now that name should be familiar, especially to those of you who went to the school by the same name. We don't name schools for people we didn't like, so obviously General Byng is somebody that we do like. But when he was first given command, he also thought, oh no, what have I done to deserve this? However, he, unlike his predecessor, General Alderson, learned to appreciate that the Canadians could fight. This is one of the craters. I wanted to give you an idea of what it looked like. This is what it looks like today. So a lot of the edges have filled in, but you can still see how absolutely enormous it is. And it's hard to tell how deep this goes, but we're probably talking about 10 to 12 feet down, if not more than that. So I wanted you to see how big some of these craters got. Okay, so that's it for this particular one. The next one I want you to have a listen to or have a look at is about the standard battle strategy. Because before we can understand Mount Sorel and what made Mount Sorel so invigorating, you have to understand how the battles had been playing out. So the next thing I want you to do is to access the standard battle strategies PowerPoint and video. Okay, thanks. Bye.